Welcome to the Spring 2024 Licensed Lay Worship Leader Gathering. I'm glad that you are able to share in this day together, and I pray that you may feel God's blessing as you learn together, share with one another, and build connections that I hope last throughout the whole year. My name is Micol Cottrell. I am the Pastoral Relations Minister for Antler River Watershed, Horseshoe Falls, and Western Ontario Waterways Regional Council. In this role, I am the Regional Council staff support to the Human Resources Commission and to the Licensed Lay Worship Leader Resource Team. Unfortunately, due to other commitments that have come up, I am unable to join with you in person today. But I know from working with the Licensed Lay Worship Leader Resource Team that you are in amazing hands with these dedicated, thoughtful, skilled, and very faithful people. I invite you to give them a round of applause. I love that thing that you said during the service that you didn't say. It meant so much to me. A congregation member, any congregation member. Does it sound familiar to you? You finish leading worship. Maybe you are thinking, hey, that went really well, or maybe it's one of those services that you walk away and go, oh, that wasn't my best. But after worship, you are greeting people, you're shaking hands, and someone comes up to you and says, wonderful worship service, or wonderful sermon. And you think, that's really nice to hear. But the conversation doesn't end with this regular pleasantry. I really liked how you preached about, the person continues. And they say something that, well, you know, wasn't part of the sermon that you wrote, or wasn't part of the prayers or the words you used or the time for young and young at heart. But the friendly congregation member isn't done. As you are going through all these thoughts, you hear, I really needed to hear that. Thank you. And you're left thinking, I don't know where they got that. Did this person not hear me? Was I not clear? What happened? After experiencing this situation numerous times early in my ministry, I was sitting with colleagues and we were talking about worship. And this common experience of what feels like a disconnect came up. And that's when a colleague shared wisdom that I will never forget. She said, that's the Holy Spirit at work. And we went on to talk about how the space between the worship leadership, leading worship, and the congregation receiving and sharing in worship, that space between is sacred ground. It's the space where the Holy Spirit is at work in amazing ways. In worship, we journey through tender and holy ground. On this holy ground, we can help create the sacred space where God's grace is celebrated and received. On this holy ground, if we don't journey with great care, we can also cause tremendous harm. People put a lot of trust in us when we lead worship. Whether they talk about what's going on in their life or not, whether they talk about the worship experience or not, they trust that what we share as worship leaders, the way we lead them in praise and prayer, is done with great skill, care, and faith. Will handle their life, their community of faith, their worship with love. One of the things that I pause and reflect on whenever I share the Licensed Lay Worship Leader Pulpit Supply List is that I do so knowing that the congregations who receive your names can trust that you have shown the skills to lead worship, have taken time to learn, are committed to upholding what it means to be a licensed lay worship leader, and will lead them and hold them in their worship with great faith and care. They know that you are accountable to the regional council and can be trusted with this tremendous, important moment in their weekly life as a church. You are entrusted with helping lead people in worship, and through word, action, silence, music, and more, you invite people into that sacred and very intimate ground where people open themselves in worship to God's Spirit moving. That's a pleasure. That's an honor to be part of. And it's also a very serious responsibility. A theology professor of mine said something that to my class many years ago that has stayed with me since, and I reflect on regularly in my role now. He said that some people criticize the United Church, saying that we don't write theological statements. As an academic, he did what academics do by writing a paper. And in that paper, he reflected on and noted that it is in the policies of our church that we name and live out our theology. We are going to be exploring some pieces of the Regional Council's Licensed Lay Worship Leader Policy and Guidelines Handbook. As we do this, I want you to remember that this isn't just words in a document that the Human Resources Commission came up or gathered from wider church documents, that this handbook speaks to the care taken as you and congregations are supported by the Regional Council to journey in the sacred ground of worship together. Meeting Regional Council needs. You have felt a call to lead worship throughout our Regional Council. Your leadership isn't just with a community of faith, but you get the joy of supporting congregations throughout our Regional Council in times when their minister is away and in times when they are without a minister. It's occasional, and the gifts are spread widely to support the needs of our whole Regional Council. Frequency of preaching. The licensed lay worship leader may cover no more than 3 consecutive Sundays in a month in one community of faith. If asked to lead worship for more than 3 Sundays in a single community of faith, the licensed lay worship leader and the community of faith must seek the approval of the licensed lay worship leader resource team before doing so. As a licensed lay worship leader, your worship with a congregation is occasional. You help meet the immediate needs of a congregation. But this isn't a replacement for regular ministry in the congregation. You are limited to leading no more than 3 consecutive Sundays in a month in one community of worship. And if you're asked to lead more than 3 consecutive Sundays, for example, while the minister is away for a month or on sabbatical or a medical leave or for whatever reason, you need to tell the leadership of the church that they need to contact the licensed lay worship leader resource team. And they can do that through the chair or through me. Again, your worship is occasional. It meets the immediate needs, and it's important, and it's a holy calling. And in that, you want to hold boundaries so that the community you serve on that Sunday doesn't ignore the long-term needs for ministry just by meeting their immediate weekly worship needs. This doesn't limit the worship you provide, but it is a place of the wider worship of the church. And you always want them to look at their wider needs and not just that Sunday or Sunday by Sunday. So please help them to hold this boundary. When you are invited into a community of faith to lead worship, they invite you knowing that you are accountable to the Regional Council. That's an important thing. It's easy to take this for granted, but it means that they can trust that you have received training, that through prayerful discernment, you have been found ready to serve in this capacity. And if something does go wrong, or if there's a concern that comes up, the community of faith has a place to go for support and care. So you are required on an annual basis to provide the licensed lay worship leader resource team with a complete list of dates and locations of all services of worship led in the previous year, including those services led outside the boundaries of your regional council. Included in this report will be a list of continuing education events attended. You may also want to submit a list of relevant books that you are reading as part of your ongoing education as a licensed lay worship leader, because we are always learning as we lead worship. And you are encouraged and required to share how you are continuing to grow in the skills of worship leader. Accountability is important. It also means that if you have questions or concerns or something happens in a worship service in a current community of faith that you need help with, you can turn for support to the Licensed Lay Worship Leader Resource Team and to myself. We are called to respect local practices. Whenever someone leads worship, they need to do so with great care and love. The community of faith that we walk into when we lead worship has its local practices, its sacred rhythms and important rituals. So you should take care to find out what these are before you plan the service, to not only respect who the congregation is, but to be able to join them in that sacred ground of worship to celebrate and experience God's presence. This applies to this applies to you as an LLWL, but it also applies to ministry personnel who are doing pulpit supply. Because congregations are the experts in their own lives, their own faith, their own way of communicating the divine presence. They're experts in their own worship. We shouldn't go into a church with a plan to correct or shock or change or to educate them, but to share in this moment, to learn together, to reflect together, to share together, and to grow together. When we lead worship in a congregation, our relationship is limited. It meets them in the moment to share with them the holy encounter of God's presence. So don't just respect local practices, but I really invite you to take the time to learn from the congregations you encounter, because you will learn just as much from them as they will learn from you on that Sunday morning. Remuneration. You've made a large commitment to become a licensed lay worship leader. From the time and financial cost in your education, to the interviews and to completing annual reports and to undertaking continuing education, you have made a big commitment. As such, the Human Resources Commission has said that the minimum salary, the minimum remuneration of licensed lay worship leaders is the same amount as visiting ministry personnel from the current minimum salary and reimbursement from ministry personnel. For 2024, that's $247.55 for mileage from home to the church, and if there's more than one church, between the churches and return. This is now the cover page for the pulpit supply list. So all communities of faith who use the licensed lay worship leader pulpit supply list have this information. Last year, the Human Resources Commission approved a cancellation policy to respect that a lot of work goes into preparing the service, If the service is canceled, the community of faith is still expected to pay you 75% of the rate because you have done about 75% of the work for that Sunday. So if you wake up one winter and you can't get to the service because of the snow or the church has to cancel, you are still paid 75% of the rate because you have done this work on behalf of the church. Remember that the money you receive as a licensed worship leader is taxable income, and the communities of faith are responsible for issuing you a T4A when they have paid you more than $500 a year. Your discernment isn't just with the regional council. That's why local support is important. You are an active member in the life of your congregation. And even though there are Sundays you are not there because you are out sharing the gospel with others, you are part of a community of faith that feeds you, nourishes you, and supports you. You not only require the support of your governing body, they are also encouraged to invite you to share the gifts of worship leadership with them. This is compensated in recognition of your licensing. We hope that in this work you will always feel the support and always support your community of faith, because that is the relationship out of which this work flows through the regional council. Boundaries are important, and it's important that you uphold the boundaries of your position as a licensed lay worship leader. Your call to share these gifts of God that has been prayerfully discerned by the regional council is to be a lay person supporting communities of faith in their worship leadership, to share these gifts of God that you have been entrusted with. Because your call is not to be a ministry personnel in the United Church, and the church has not discerned this calling in you, and you have not been trained for this, you are not able to provide pastoral care or the sacraments. You are not ministry personnel. Unfortunately, there are some who will celebrate your excellence in worship leadership and will begin to blur the lines and ask you to do more. As the one who is licensed and accountable to the regional council, it is your responsibility to hold healthy boundaries around what it means to be a licensed lay worship leader, and because of this, to not share in pastoral care or to offer the sacraments. Now, of course, you will be pastorally sensitive in your worship and in the conversations you have at coffee time after or before as you get to know people. Your worship will open people to God's grace, but you will direct people, if they are looking for pastoral care or the sacraments, back to their congregational leadership, who will connect them with a minister in the area. Funerals. Presiding at funerals for members or adherents of a community of faith, including at a funeral home, shall be done only at the invitation of the called or appointed minister of that community of faith, the pastoral charge supervisor, or the Human Resources Commission. Conversation with the called or appointed ministry personnel or the pastoral charge supervisor of the community of faith must happen prior to making any arrangements with a family, an individual, or a funeral home. If, after following all the above noted steps, the licensed lay worship leader conducts a funeral, they must ensure that the information about the service is properly entered in the burial registry of the community of faith. You are entrusted with worship, and at times this may include leading funerals. There are limits around this that are important to hold. Take care of family. The care of family and loved ones rests with the minister and the governing body. This policy is the same for ministry personnel who are not serving the particular community of faith. Funerals are pastoral moments, but remember, you are not trained or called to provide pastoral care. Care should be taken to connect the family to the leadership of the congregation for appropriate pastoral care. And in this conversation, if you are asked by someone connected to the congregation to lead a funeral, as you follow these steps, please don't start by saying to the individual, "I'd be happy to if it's okay with so-and-so," because you want to respect and uphold the relationship between that individual, the community faith, and their minister. So if someone is asking you to lead a funeral service, ask them to connect to the governing body or the ministry personnel, contact them and let them know about this policy. Your worship licensing does not give you the right, and you're not called to serve as a chaplain to a funeral home. Providing funerals through a funeral home must follow the practices of leading worship in funerals. That is, it goes through local congregations. You're not to be advertising yourself outside of the regional council process as a worship leader, because you are leading worship on behalf of a community of faith, the ones that invite you into their life to share in worship. Congregations trust you as you lead worship with them. The spiritual intimacy of worship comes with a lot of responsibility. We have continually seen the impact, historical and present, of how inappropriate or abusive worship can lead to physical, emotional, and spiritual harm and abuse. Because of your care and faith in worship leadership, because of the intimacy of the worship moment, people will sometimes misplace emotional attachment, including romantic feelings, onto you. This is why it is important to hold healthy boundaries and to continue to learn and reflect upon the United Church's policies on boundaries, on sexual abuse, on workplace discrimination, harassment, and violence. One of the very important, but unfortunately not always thought about, benefits of communities of faith in receiving worship from licensed lay worship leaders as opposed to other lay people not licensed is that you are covered under the insurance of the regional council for the worship service you provide. This is because you have taken time not only to be licensed, but to upkeep your training on boundaries, your police records check, and your accountability to the regional council. You are serving on behalf of the regional council. Congregations, and this is the big important piece, can trust that due diligence by the regional council has happened. And because of this, you are covered under the insurance. This is a big deal. Someone comes up to you after worship and you hear, "I love that thing you said during the service." And you think, "I didn't say that." And they continue, "It meant so much to me." The space between our worship leadership and the worship of the congregation is sacred ground where God's Spirit is at work. So we always lead worship with great care, love, faith, and professionalism. As licensed lay worship leaders, you are entrusted and supported with this holy art of worship leadership. The policy found in our handbook and the guidelines found in our handbook is there to help you and there to help communities of faith. You're expected to know it, to follow it, And if you have questions about it, to ask those questions. You can always contact me if you've got questions about the policy. Our handbook names the theology of our church and the theology of licensed lay worship leaders. It names the care that is taken in the sharing of the sacred gifts of worship leadership as a licensed lay worship leader. It names the trust placed in you and the trust that the community of faith and the regional council has in you. You can find the full handbook on the regional council website. To find the handbook, the Licensed Lay Worship Leader handbook, you will go to the regional council website, and they all look the same. They all have the same layout. On the top bar, you'll go over to Tools. Once you click Tools, a drop-down menu will appear. The second item is Toolkits. You'll click on that, and the page will come up listing all the different toolkits. Scroll down to Toolkit 16, push the little drop down, click on it, and the full piece will appear, and you'll find the policy there, as well as the application for initial licensing and the yearly report form, as well as my contact information. Now, if you are not comfortable with the internet, or you're not able to get the handbook, or you want a paper copy sent to you, please let one of the Licensed Lay Worship Leader Resource Team members know, or contact me, and I'll mail you a copy of that document. Friends, we journey. Every time we lead worship, as we prepare it, and as we share it, we journey with care through sacred ground where God's Spirit is at work. As you continue to share the gifts God has entrusted to you as a licensed lay worship leader, may you continue to feel God's deepest blessings. Thank you for undertaking this important work in our regional council. God bless.